In a world where many people see reality as a circle or a rectangle, the truth is that issues are cylinders. Rather than a two-dimensional understanding, we will flush out the three-dimension complexities through nuanced conversation and civil, respectable discourse to highlight all perspectives on controversial issues. I'm your host, William Roosh, a high school teacher who's trying to transform education as we know it. Welcome to the Anti-Echo Chamber. This is Cylinder Radio. Hello and welcome to the next lesson, the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I'm your host, Will Roosh, school teacher in Los Angeles, and now a part of the Heterodox Academy K-12 education group, trying to bring critical thinking back to classrooms. And that brings me to my guest today, Professor Ilana Redstone. She got her PhD at University of Pennsylvania, and she is now a sociology professor at the University of Illinois. And she is a real-life sociologist who is focused on viewpoint diversity. She's kind of put her eggs in that basket. And this is so aligned with everything that I'm trying to do with this podcast, of trying to understand all perspectives and things like that. So I heard her on another podcast, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to take a shot in the dark and see if I can get her to come on, and she did. So Professor Redstone, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So in school, so I'm in, the high school realm, K through 12 education, the lack of viewpoint diversity seems to be a problem. That's why I started this podcast. So can you just, before we dive into really what that all is, can you just give us a little bit of background to, I like to have for my audience to what makes you an expert? What gives you I don't know, that's kind of like a weird way to put it, but what gives you the ability to understand what is kind of happening, maybe on a deeper level than other people who don't focus on this as their area of study?
I think that's a good question, because it actually sort of gets to the question of, can you, to what extent can you teach people to think differently? And the answer is, I think the short answer is, I don't think we really know. What makes me different? I don't know. I think that a lot of what I do started for me with just being really unsatisfied and really frustrated with what appeared to be just extraordinarily oversimplified answers to really complicated issues. And I for a long time, I think I just felt like, I would kind of be in conversations with people about this social problem or that issue or this research coming out or whatever it was, and just kind of am I everyone else seems to be on board here? What am I not getting? Because this is making no sense to me. And so I think and then through just over the years, just sort of, extended from there, just by observing what's going on in my own department, in the discipline, and frankly, just paying attention to society more broadly. So yeah, I guess that's how I would answer that.
Yeah, really smart people are doing this thing with overly, that's a great way to put it, is these overly simplistic answers to really complicated problems. And these are really smart people. These are college professors. These are colleagues of yours, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
It's so confusing for me, because I teach now at a private school, and there's a lot of very brilliant people that work here. And when I came in, I felt like I was not up to par, because I taught in really tough neighborhoods before this, and I went to just a state school, and I don't have a master's degree or anything like that. And it felt a little bit like Emperor's New Clothes, where the stuff was going on, and I was just but wait a second, no, it's not that simple. I feel like I'm almost too dumb to not to be self-deprecating, but I'm almost I don't know. I'm more curious, perhaps, because I'm recognized that I don't have a lot of answers, and that it almost has been my strong suit in this whole pursuit.
Right. Recognizing how little you actually know.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, we just finished the semester here. Our last day of classes was on the 11th, and at the end of one of the classes, at the end of the social problems class, and some of the students were offering their perspectives about, what they got out of the class. And I mean, it was a really great group of students. And, and it sort of became clear. I was like, it would be great if the one thing that you all walk away with, or some portion of you walk away with, is just a willingness to recognize how little we all know. That would be great. That's 15 weeks well spent.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, there's a piece of it that just requires some humility and curiosity, and yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's hard to do. I remember reading Carol Dweck's book Mindset, and like just breaking down that if you view yourself as the smart person, or the smartest person in the room, then you have such a deep part of your identity that anything that would challenge that is like challenging and putting yourself at risk, and you have to protect that ego, that sense of self. So you can't admit that you don't know something, perhaps. And I never really had that. So the more that we can but in students, they should, because that's why you're in schools. You clearly don't have all the answers.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they don't, and I mean, so that's a generalization. There are some that do. But there are certainly lots that don't. I mean, there are lots of faculty that don't. I mean, many faculty that don't. So, and it's sort of just, so there's a reinforcement process that happens that starts, I think, at the level that you, or even younger than the level that where you are.
Yeah. So you have a class called Bigots and Snowflakes: Living in a World Where Everyone Else is Wrong. That's the name of it?
It is.
Is it popular?
So I'm only teaching it now for the second time. So there's sort of a boring answer to that question. So I taught it last spring for the first time, and there were about 14 students in it, and it was a great group of students, and it was great to teach. So I'm teaching it again in the spring. There are about 20 students currently enrolled. The boring answer to your question is that it doesn't have, so I think at the U of I, like most colleges, until you have a regular course number, your course gets sort of hidden in a general rubric. So at the U of I, it's a 396. At the 300 level, it's a 396 course. And so it just so there are multiple 396 classes. I think there's 9, and then I don't even remember what the other one is, but it's something totally unrelated. But it's basically just a catch-all. So students, if they're just looking through sociology courses, they wouldn't necessarily see it. And so I think, it's impossible to know what would enrollment be like if it were more visible. But I'm happy with that. I mean, 20 is higher than it was last semester, or last spring. So I'm looking forward to teaching it again, and I'll make some changes from how I taught it last time. And
that might have been a weird question, but I'm just, because I'm so interested in it. Like, I want to
right. Like for me, I'm just like, well, we should make this a requirement. Like, everyone should be taking this. But obviously not everyone feels that way.
So I suppose, like, on can you just give us like a basic rundown of elementary level sociology of why do you think it is that we do this? Is it tribalism? And just for like the listeners, just to maybe make it more clear, we're just talking about the polarization of things in politics, really, but in everything, about how, we're losing a lot of nuance when it comes to complicated issues, and we're kind of just going off into our own little echo chambers, and we have the ability to communicate with people, and we kind of choose not to. We, whether it's social media algorithms or whatever it is, the number of cable news channels, whatever it is, but we're not communicating. We're not getting the full robust picture of complicated issues and stuff like that. And it becomes a lot of a blame game. We're recording this the day after that Trump was officially impeached by the House, going to trial in the Senate. And it's just, people are seeing two very different things. And it's fascinating to me. And I think it should be studied. But can you give just like because I know this is what you do all day. So to make it overly, risk of being overly simplistic, can you maybe explain like why that is? I don't know if that's.
I mean, I don't know that I have I can tell you sort of what I think and what I've observed. I mean, I don't know if I have back to the humility part, I don't know that I have some magical right answer. I mean, my sense is it's a combination of things. I think that there is I think there's an enormous amount of fear and sort of not wanting to say. I mean, so I heard someone use the term pluralistic ignorance, which is a little bit like what you were talking about, just sort of in terms of the emperor's new clothes. Like everyone just is kind of like, well, no one else is saying anything, so I'm not going to say anything. So I think there's a little bit of that, and a desire to not be stigmatized. I'm trying to remember. There was an example of something, I can't remember specifically what the topic was, but in the social problems class that I was teaching this past fall, the one that just ended, where I thought it was a 15-week exercise in intellectual humility. And at one point there was a student who was, I wish I could remember the topic, but he was taking a position on something that was the unpopular position. I don't remember. Maybe it was about blackface. I don't remember what the topic was, but he was taking a position just for the sake of argument. And he felt very clear, and this was well into the semester, so the students and we all sort of, knew each other a little bit and had built up some amount of trust. But he clearly felt the need to issue a disclaimer before he said, because what he wanted to say is, he was sort of like, well, on the other hand, someone could view it blah, blah, blah. But to the whole class, he was like, I don't agree with this. I don't think this is not what I'm saying. I think this is wrong. I think whatever the issue was, I think it's, just very much felt the need to make sure that all of his classmates knew where he was. And then like that he was just trying to make an argument. And so I think that pressure is real. So I think there's that part of it. I think that there is, I think that there are a number of, and this is sort of wrote about, I don't know, we probably haven't had a chance to look at it, but I wrote a paper that I didn't come up with the title, but it was called The Silent Crisis in the Classroom, which is it's on my website, but it's just on a Google Drive. It's available to anyone. And so it's a paper that I presented at the FIRE conference in October, late October. And in that paper, one of the things that I argue, or the main argument, is just that there is a conflation between sort of a way of understanding the world and truth, which gets back to the humility. And I think that is pervasive. So just a general sort of unwillingness, and I don't think it's, again, I don't think this stuff comes from a place of bad intentions. Like I think it's an unwillingness or a lack of awareness that there are other ways to think about the world, and there are other ways to think about how we solve problems. And I mean, even if you take, the common example of how we think about identity, right? Just this assumption that these sort of traditional axes of identity are how all people think of themselves, how all people should think of themselves, that this is the best way to organize ourselves in society, that you should think of yourself along, racial, gender, whatever, right. Sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, all of these things. That's how you should primarily think about yourself. And it's just not true. I mean, it's true for lots of people, but it's not true for everybody.
Universally, yeah.
Right. It's not true universally, and it's not even clear that it's the best way to organize ourselves, right? Because of all the way it ends up being divisive. And so, I mean, I can just think of a couple of examples, and I don't remember if these, I think they might have come up in the Heterodox Academy podcast, but one of them is, there was a graduate student that I was talking to at one point, and he, not at the U of I, but he was saying how his background was African American and Indian, and so from the country India. And so he was saying, and so he was studying psychology, and he was talking about how in his undergraduate experience and in his graduate experience, there's people see him and they see him as African American entirely, and there's an assumption that he wants to belong to sort of all of the identity-based groups on campus. That was his experience in undergraduate. And then in graduate school, there's just an assumption that he wants to study, racism and microaggressions and because of his status as somebody who's not white. And, when I was talking to him, and he's just like, well, I don't want to study any of those things. So that's not really interesting to me. And I don't, he's like, it's really frustrating that that's just the assumption, so there's just I guess it's two-part. Yeah. So I guess an unwillingness to see that people don't always want to be viewed that way. And also just the broader question is this really good for, like, what kind of society do you want to live in? Do we want to live in? And is this going to get us there?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's really important. I had two transgender individuals on two of my first three podcasts, and Danny was a transgender man born a woman, and he is an activist. So that is, he said, like, to me, when you look in the mirror, what do you see? And I kind of, was in a conversation, and I kind of knew what he was going at. So I was like, oh, well, I see a man. And then he was like, yeah, exactly. Like, well, I saw a man too. And then I had on Corinna Cohn, who is a transgender woman born a man, and wrote a book, but it was on computer programming. And I think that she would answer, when you look in the mirror, what do you see? It would be like, a badass computer programmer,
Right.
And so their views on the trans issue were very different. The way that they approached the whole trans issue, the LGBT issue, was just very different.
Oh, interesting.
And it wasn't like, I don't think it was like polar opposites, because Corinna was also obviously very much in favor of the 14th Amendment and equal rights and all that kind of stuff, but it just wasn't as much a part of her life. She just doesn't see herself just as that. It's like lower on the hierarchy of how you view yourself.
Right. Like, here are the 15 things that I think about when I think about who I am, and it's here, or it's here, it's here. But I think what we do is that we are in a place where we just assume that these axes should be given primacy all the time, always. And I think there's, there's more to say on that, but I think that that's not right. And I think an unwillingness to sort of reflect on that and question that assumption. Like, is that true? Like, is that even true? Is this how people want to think about themselves? Is this the best way to organize ourselves? Is this, all of those questions don't get asked because we don't question the underlying assumption.
Yeah, I think with those two conversations, and I've had other conversations with transgender individuals since then, it made me realize this very obvious point that people are different. And just because you are, black or white or a woman or gay or whatever, like, you are not going to think the same. And, I know this because I have gay friends who are, maybe politically conservative and liberal and are this and that. Like, we're all so unique and we're such individuals, but that's not the narrative that gets put out there. If you don't have a lot of interactions with a specific group of people, then you don't know. Then all you know is what you see maybe on your screen or something like that. And I think it's important. I love I think it's a Pope Francis quote, "A good shepherd smells of sheep." I love that quote because I think that's part of it. If you're going to try and help, immigrants, like, how many immigrants do you have a good relationship with or talk to every day? If you want to help homeless people, are you there regularly? Do they know your name and you know theirs? And I think that matters if we're trying to, in the long term, we're trying to solve problems, societal problems. We're trying to improve society. Right. And I think that's very difficult to do if you don't understand the problems.
Yeah, and but I think but even in what you're saying, which makes all the sense in the world. There's a line to walk between, and I know this is not what you're suggesting, but there's a line to walk between, yes, wandering with the sheep, but also I'm going to mix metaphors here, but also recognizing that even if you have, 5 of your closest friends are a member of whatever, some small, previously disenfranchised group, they still don't speak for the group. Right. Like, and that people don't speak for the collective. And this is something else that would come up a fair bit over the course of this past semester, just that, there is no Black experience that, defines the Black community politically or the Latino community politically or something like that. And so that in itself is something that needs to be, it just needs attention and recognition.
Yeah, I think it was Representative Presley, I think, was saying something along the lines of, if you are a member of this community, you don't speak for them politically, then, you're doing wrong or something. It was something along those lines. And I just thought it sounded really polarizing. Like, I just know too many people that think differently. But yeah, like to speak for a group, then that breaks us off into groups and makes us more tribal. And is that doing good? I think we can take a step back and look, like, is this creating positive, ripple effects or negative ones? And we need to look at that as objectively as possible. Like, is what you're attempting to do, is it happening?
Right. Yeah. I mean, are you getting where you want to be? Like, are you even incrementally, are you getting closer to where you want to be? The other thing I think which relates to this, how we think about ourselves in groups, and you asked from the sociological perspective, in sociology, we talk a lot about, and this I talk about in the paper, but we talk a fair bit about conflict theory, even if we don't call it by name, because, and really what that means is it's a way of thinking about the world in this sort of oppressed versus oppressor dynamic, and that is an accurate, the idea is that is sort of an accurate, you could change which groups you're looking at, but that's an accurate way to understand the world is through a lens of power dynamics. All interactions are sort of viewed through a lens of power dynamics. And one of the things that we've talked about, that we talked about over the course of the semester is that, okay, well, let's just say that that's the way you want to understand the world, because that's what makes sense to you. Even in that case, how do you reconcile, how do you take sort of these group characteristics about power and yet you're holding people accountable at the individual level, right? And so whether if you take race or if you any immigration status or and so you get into this is where you quickly slide into this problem of collective guilt, which is nobody wants to be assigned. I mean, it's think about every once in a while, like one of my kids comes home from school and they get in trouble because somebody in class did something or said something, and they all have to, this was years ago, but they all have to put their heads on their desk. This is my middle one, and he was, this is several years ago, but, and he's just like, what the heck? Like, why do I have to put my head on the desk? I didn't do anything. So collective guilt, I mean, and obviously, when you talk about racial issues and things that are charged historically, that has an entirely different meaning, but nobody responds well to this. It is not helpful. No one wants to be held accountable or held responsible for something that, members of their group did.
Yeah, and they're gonna push back. And they're going to push back in ways that you might not be calculating and you might not like. And yeah, that's kind of what I seem to be seeing.
Right.
So the sociology departments have adopted this, though. And just as someone who, you've devoted your life to the social sciences, it doesn't feel scientific. What you're saying is, it's in line with everything that seems to make sense to me and people that I admire, whether it's like Peter Boghossian and Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson or Brett Weinstein. Like, these are like very like well-accredited, smart people and they're like, no, this isn't good. But then they're in the minority. You're in the minority, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in the minority. And as far as I know, so I'm certainly in the minority in my department. Am I in the minority on my campus? We're a large institution. I probably.
But in the sociology departments, for sure.
Yeah, actually, right? I was just reading a paper about this morning. There was someone at UC Riverside wrote a paper about this in the American Sociologist. But the sociology is facing, as a discipline, I think is facing a huge split about whether it is sort of a scientific discipline or an activist, whether it's part of a social movement towards social justice. And I think that the latter is, winning may not be the right word, but is, for lack of a better word, is winning. Mm-hmm. I don't think those two things can coexist. I think it's enormously challenging. I have not, let me put it this way, I have not seen any evidence of departments where those two things, or disciplinary organizations where those two visions can coexist. And I think it has enormous implications. It has, because these assumptions, what are you trying to do? What's your goal of research? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to sort of expand our knowledge base, which is ostensibly what at least originally and historically what people thought of as research? Are you trying to advocate for particular groups? Are you trying to pursue a social justice agenda? These are all things that are being put forth, even if it's not explicitly, although that's happening more and more, I think, within the discipline of sociology.
So, I guess I just don't know where this is going to go. Like, is this, if this is where social science and sociology departments are really headed, if they become just very politicized, is this something that is going to get reversed? Is this something that, because again, people have devoted their lives to that now, and they're not going to just go, oh, you know what, you're right. They're going to continue with the methods that they have. People are getting more and more entrenched. I don't know, how is this going to play out? What do you,
you mean within sociology? Or
yeah, sociology, and then the way, because that filters down to my world of the colleges of education.
Right. Oh yeah, education, yes, you guys are almost as steeped in this kind of way of seeing the world as sociology is. I don't know. I guess there's sort of short and long-term predictions. The short-term prediction, I think, is that it's going to keep going the way it's going. I think that people aren't questioning these things about, how, okay, well, is this the way to understand the world through a lens of, through this paradigm of, again, just to use the conflict theory, oppressed and oppressor, is that no one wants to question that. That underpins a lot of other theories that come out that sort of spawn out outwards from there. So in terms of, some certain aspects of feminist theory or queer theory or critical race theory, all of these, one of these ideas is, the idea of colorblind racism, which is also something that is very much tied to, it seems to me that different people claim sort of the origins of this idea. So it seems to come from multiple sources, but, the idea that denying or not focusing on race essentially all the time or close to all the time, certainly in any policy discussion or in any discussion of disparities, if you're not talking about race and more specifically racism, that itself is an act of racism. And so, that's just one example. That's a pretty strong statement, and that's pretty dominant in sociology. So that's pretty much unquestioned. And I've tried to get students to, I talked through that in the last semester, we spent a fair bit of time talking about that and the problems with that sort of theoretical perspective. But the reality is that I'm one person teaching one class, and I don't know. So I think that in the short term, just I guess to go back to your question, I guess I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to be super optimistic that, sort of our side is going to win or whatever, at least in the short term. But I guess the same reason you keep doing it, I imagine, it's just, feel like you're just shouting into the wind. Like, what is going on here? Has everybody just lost their mind, or have I lost my mind?
Yeah. And I think that our side, now you and I are tribal.
Right.
But I think we will win because it's truth.
In the long term, maybe. In the short term, I'm not sure.
Long term. Right. Yeah. I think that's what I mean. It could be in a pile of rubble, metaphorically, but when we're standing in that pile of rubble, I think that, reality, I think it was James Lindsay said on the podcast, reality bats last.
Right.
And that unfortunately might be what it takes. I hope it's not. Yeah, that's why I'm doing this, and I'm sure that's why you're doing that. And I'm so appreciative that you are, because you are as credible as it gets. You're a sociology professor. Like that matters. Like what your station is in life matters, as far as not all opinions are equal. And it has to be, because I'm going to take a climate scientist point of view on climate change over my, my uncle, and we should.
Right.
Like certain people have devoted their lives to learning this stuff.
Right.
So
right.
You being credible, like your voice should be heard. That's why I wish I had more people tuning into this podcast, because I want people to hear a sociology professor saying, like, let's dig into this stuff a little bit more. Let's try and understand this stuff, not just follow it blindly.
It's sort of mind-boggling to me how people can be so convinced that they're right. Like, I mean, I feel like I spend and I think my guess is you probably do too. I mean, I spend an outrageous amount of time just wondering what the ways in which I'm wrong. Like,
yeah.
I just sort of assume, I'm just trying to figure things out. And I just never had that conviction that how I understood the world was right. And so it is sort of continually surprising, and maybe surprising is the wrong word, but it's just stunning to me, the conviction with which people understand with how they interpret the world, and that we've been wrong historically. History has told us that we have been wrong collectively over and over and over again. And that there are things there are truths there for us to know that we don't know right now, right? And that we will figure, and this is sort of the reality bats last. Yeah. But why on earth, unless we think that we have suddenly, as a species, figured it all out. I'm sure we've got it right this time. And that this is how we think about identity, and this is how we think about disparities and group differences, and this is how we think about, gender versus sex. Right, now we know. Now we've got it figured out. Okay, really? Are you sure?
Are you, just two more questions for you. Are you a bit of a pariah, like on campus or in the academic circles, of like, you're not towing the line? Alana, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing?
I mostly seem to be under the radar. People in my department know what I'm doing. I think our department has other struggles that probably take precedence over whatever I'm doing. I think that a couple of things could change that. I mean, one is, I have a book with a colleague at UCLA, and that book should come out. Actually, we're sort of waiting to hear from the editor, but we've sent in the revised manuscript, and it should, in theory, be out, I would think, in early summer. Awesome. And so I don't know if that will make people angry, or if just, something as simple as if I took the Bigots and Snowflakes class and I tried to apply for a regular course number, that would bring the visibility to the next level at the college. And I don't know how that, it's something I'm planning on doing, but those, the university bureaucracy, those meetings only happen, twice a year or something. And so I have to wait till next fall or something. But I don't know. I mean, so I don't get a lot of, my department, I think I do tend to be the lone voice of dissent on pretty much everything. But
are you concerned? Are you concerned about your career?
I have tenure. So I do need to go up for promotion to full. And so hopefully that will happen very soon. Okay. And so I hope I don't have reason to be concerned. I think I'm okay in that respect. Mostly I try and just lead in a way that, or not, I don't know if lead's the right word, but teach, write, and speak in a way that I would say anything that I'm saying to you, that I'm writing, that I'm saying to students, I would be comfortable saying to my dean, to my department head, right? Like, I'm not trying to get away with anything or be anything other than just trying to get people to think. And so I guess as long as you sort of, and I don't think I'm alone in this, but as long as you're sort of, you can stand behind what you're saying and you sort of have to live with your own conscience, then I guess I just have to, I don't know, hopefully it's not naive. Hopefully I'm not talking to you, 2 years from now and I'm like living on the street corner. But just trust that people will stand behind you for that. So.
Oh, well, I really look forward to your book, and And yeah, I hope so too. I hope that it'll just start to get more and more a little maybe crazy, for lack of a better term, and then people will start to like listen and open up their minds a little bit. But it takes
I also
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go.
Well, just as a last thought, one of the reasons that I think, in addition to the reality bats last, the other thing, and this is pure speculation, but sort of similar to that graduate student who I was saying, who just felt like he wasn't given the latitude to pursue his own, I mean, not that he was being blocked, but that just assumptions were made about him and his interests based on his race or what appeared to be his race. But part of the reason that I think that this approach won't work in the long run is I just think, and I think this may happen after I'm dead and gone, but that, you have this extraordinary diversity and you have generations that are going to come up behind the current generation. And it just seems to me that ultimately you're going to get generations who are going to rebel against this idea, whether it's the next generation or the one after that. They themselves are going to say, what is this crap? Like, I don't want to be viewed this way. Like, I've been here, my family's been here now for, 3 generations, and I don't want to just, think of myself this way. I think people are going to I don't think people want to be boxed in like that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I see it just teaching high school that I started to teach a civics class this year that is kind of similar. It's teaching these ideas, and it's risky, but I'm in a place where I'm able to do it. And the kids,
supportive.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. It's the only way I'd be able to do this podcast and everything. But the teenagers are BS detectors. They love this because they're seeing stuff and they're like, wait a second, no, but everyone's telling me that this is the way it is. Like, they are just looking for holes in the stuff that they learn day in and day out. And there are glaring holes here. So when I present maybe this isn't what it's being presented as, they really love it. Like they're digging in because of just what you said. Like, they're rebellious as it is.
Right.
So you're telling them that they have to be in, home by midnight. And they're like, well, why? But at the end of the day, they know why. Right. Where with some of these ideas, they're going to rebel and they're going to have traction. Right. Because they're not rooted very deeply in any kind of reality. I mean, yeah.
Because you're sort of giving them at an early age, and certainly much earlier than, the students by the time they get to me or whatever, but, you're giving them the space. They're sort of, it sounds like probably many of them are coming to you and they're like, I think the emperor might not be wearing any clothes.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure if the emperor is fully dressed, and then they come into your class and then they're like, I knew it. That guy's naked,
That's what I'm trying to do. But how do we, this is just, I guess, the last thing I want to pick your brain on is, how do we grow this? I mean, is it reading, Jonathan Haidt books? And Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay just released the book a couple months ago, How to Have Impossible Conversations, which was really good.
Okay.
It's great. It's about you should seek this confirmation for yourself, how you should ask the people that you're in conflict with, with genuine curiosity. What am I missing? Questions like, why do you think I think what I think? So it's that genuine curiosity of trying to understand things. Do you know people from the opposing side that are credible? Who are your 3 favorite arguments from the other side, or steel manning things as opposed to straw manning things, all of those kinds of techniques. But you have to be willing to pick up that book. And if you're willing to pick up that book or take your class, then you're already kind of I think he might not be wearing any clothes. So how do we grow this to those who are not questioning it at all?
So if you really want to grow this at the K through 12 level or at the college level, or some of the work I've been trying to branch out to is actually into the workplace as well. Mm-hmm. I struggle to understand fully how you're going to be able to do that at any of those levels without making some of these conversations or participation in some of these conversations compulsory. So as long some kind of, and then I know that I'm well aware that what I'm saying is, not likely to be adopted anywhere. Right. Yeah. But, so that would be, I guess, the ideal. Although then you get back to that question, which at the beginning, which was, can you teach people to think differently?
Yeah.
I think to a certain extent, I guess I'm optimistic that you can. I think what I've seen is it can take, I mean, it depends on what your goal is, but I think that you can, over time, I think that you can get people to question those assumptions that they make. And you have enough different kinds of interactions that they start to think differently. You know, I can just give you one more example. So we spent a lot of time over this semester. So the class that I just taught, the social problems class that I just taught was, it is very, very racially and ethnically diverse. It's not, the gender balance is, I mean, it's more women than men, but racially and ethnically, it was an extraordinarily diverse class, and about, I don't know, 40 something students would usually come, somewhere around there. And, you know, we talked a lot about racism, a lot. And at one point, this is sort of in the last, I don't know, a third of the semester or something, there was a time when a number of the students were talking about their own, and the African American students were talking about their own experiences with racism. You know, some really sort of heart-wrenching stories of things that people had said to them, and it wasn't, you know, it's just a couple of minutes of people telling their experiences, and which was, I think, had value for people to hear. It had value for them to share, and also had value. That was value in other students hearing about their stories, and so. And that in one of the stories that the student said, there was, or one of the ones at the end, like just one of the examples I can tell you, there was a student who talked about, you know, being told, you know, you're pretty for a Black girl, like this kind of thing, which is like, you're like, oh God, that's painful to even hear.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that kind of thing. And so there was one student who said toward the end, she said that when she wears her hair back in a bun and she wears hoop earrings, she gets comments like about how she's keeping it real. And so so you teach high school, so you know what that means. I didn't know what that meant, so we can go back to that in a second. I had no idea what that meant. And so, but everyone else in the class, when she said that, everyone else in the class knew, like, it's part of the vernacular or whatever, like they just knew what she was talking about. And so afterward, it became clear to me that what they were saying was that, you know, when she didn't have her hair pulled back and when she wasn't wearing hoop earrings, she was trying to look white or whatever, and she was trying to hide her ethnicity. But in that moment, when she said it and everyone understood it and I didn't, they went from this conversation, which was by all means an important conversation about these students' experiences with racism, but where, you know, the line is race in that conversation, because it was really most of the Black students that were talking, but certainly none of the white students are going to contribute to that conversation. They're never being told, you know, you're pretty for a Black girl or whatever.
Right,
That's just absurd. But as soon as this one other woman said this comment about keeping it real that everyone understood and I didn't understand, the line went from race to age like that. And so, you know, and they could all sort of share a laugh at kind of my expense, which is totally fine. You know, and so I pointed it out. My point was just that, like, I pointed it out afterward. I don't remember if it was later that day or it was the next class. And I said, you know, when this happened, like that, so yes, we're having this important conversation, then the line shifted. And so if all you're having is this conversation, how many of those opportunities are you missing? Like, what are the transcendent experiences and conversations and connections that you're missing? Because you're missing them. You definitely are.
Yeah.
And so I think just getting, you know, how do you do this? How do you get more people? I think it's a long conversation. I think that for people who are already kind of going, I'm not sure if he's wearing any clothes, then maybe it's a faster, you know, maybe you need less of a catalyst. But, and then I think for some others, it's just a lot of, you know, sort of a lot of conversations. And you have to be willing to, I think it is, you have to be willing to, take some risks in conversation. I mean, as an instructor, I think you have to be willing to take some risks. I mean, or else you're just doing what everyone else is doing.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I like is, you know, showing that you actually care. Your intentions are good. I think that also matters, because pushing against some of this stuff gets labeled as, you know, whatever, like the labels are, you know, racist, sexist, all that bad person type stuff. So, you know, it's like, it's like a quote, like, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's really good. And it's like, you know, so I think that it's important for me to, you know, engage and be there for students of all different types for whatever they're going through, and like really try to hold myself to a high standard in the way that I conduct myself, because I think that matters.
It absolutely matters.
Yeah.
I think I think it matters. I think you're right. And I think that there's, I mean, I don't know if you've had this experience as well, but I imagine it's similar in the sense that the things that the kinds of conversations that you can have at the beginning of the year are probably not exactly the same as what you can have, 15 weeks in or by winter break or something.
Yeah. So thank you for being on here, Professor. Like, where can people, are you active on like social media or anything? If they're listening to this and they're like, if they're the ones who are like, wait a second, maybe he's not wearing a coat, they're one of those people. Like, where can they kind of see your work? I would love that kids at U of I are listening, and then they can take your class and blow it up. But I don't know how many. So I do. I mean, I am on social media. I don't do a whole lot with it. I find the pressure to be pithy on Twitter to be just more than I can. It's the amount of energy that I would have to expend to express myself in that, whatever, 240 characters. Right. So I mean, but I do have a website. So the business practice that I've started is actually a reasonable way to reach me. So that's Diverse Perspectives Consulting. I'm sorry, say that one more time. Say that one more time.
It's called Diverse Perspectives Consulting, and the website is just the same, just diverseperspectivesconsulting.com. The other thing I would say is that my name is sufficiently unique that I am really easy to find.
Sure.
So, I mean, I'm findable through the University of Illinois, and my business website is actually linked through the University of Illinois. It's my profile on the sociology department webpage. But yeah, so that is an advantage in terms of the uniqueness of my name that I can take absolutely no credit for, but I can benefit from.
So just as much as I wanted to let you go, so the Diverse Perspectives Consulting, is that like how when the whole thing happened at Starbucks and they had the racial sensitivity training, is it like a training like that? But
well, it's something that I just started last summer. And because the idea was that all of these issues that we're talking about, and you see at the high school level, and I see at the college level, these dynamics are playing out in the workplace as well. There's just no reason to think that they're not. And so those kinds of conversations. So yes, so the short answer is yes, to a certain extent. It's a different way of thinking about diversity. And so on my website, there are basically three, ways that, people might be drawn into this. One is wanting to do diversity better. One is wanting to foster innovation, because as it turns out, you can't really foster innovation if people feel like they're walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
And then the other is just sort of communicating across ideological divides. And so those are, I think, all things that there are lots of organizations that face challenges with, and will continue to do so. So it's yes. Anyway, so there's a lot there, but yeah.
What an awesome idea.
It just started. So hopefully it takes off.
I hope so too. What a great idea because the data seems to show that those kinds of like racial sensitivity training or whatever it is, a lot of people resist it. And then we tried to have a thing on my campus about sexual assault, and a lot of the young boys got really angry. And like what you're trying to do is it's counter that. It's like, let's get to the root of what this really is.
Right.
Let's talk about all of this stuff. That's a brilliant idea. I really love that.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is sort of, but I'm not going to sit here and say, I think that we should all just be blurting out whatever sort of nasty remark comes to mind. So it's not about being able to say whatever you want with impunity. It's about, understanding that intent matters. And we need to recognize that it matters. It's, sort of recognizing that people's feelings matter, but you can't make them everything. In this, again, specifically talking about a workplace. Yeah. And so sort of trying to work with groups about how do you want to thread that needle, because you can't just say you can, but if you go the way a lot of these traditional diversity training programs go, you're going to end up where we are now, which is not a place a lot of firms want to be. So, and I think there's a better way to do it. So
Very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for coming and having this conversation.
Well,
I really enjoyed it. It gives some credibility to what I'm doing. So thank you for that. And yeah. So
yeah. All right. Well, good luck with everything. You're doing a great thing here. And yes, and we'll be in touch.
Oh, I hope so. All right.
Okay. Bye, Will.
Bye. This has been Cylinder Radio. The success of this podcast and the educational revolution that I hope you will be a part of is dependent on those who find value in it. Please take a few moments to review us on iTunes so the show is more easily found. If there was a perspective on today's topic that was not highlighted in this episode, or you have an idea for an episode topic that you want to understand more deeply, please email us at cylinderradio@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram @WillRusch, WillReusch. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to the next one.